Hey guys, this is Josiah from Coybilt. We're down here in Southern California at Untouchable Metalworks. I'm here with the Michale's 1964 Lemans or GTO clone project. So we found this car up in San Ramon, California. I basically had previous contact with the owner from 11 years prior. I mentioned to him that if he ever wanted to sell the car, give me a call, which he did. The car was in pretty rough shape. It was sitting in his driveway with the top down for 25 years. So you can already imagine how much rust was in this car. Reason we sort of picked it up is we also knew the Michales were looking at possibly doing a major project, and I figured I couldn't let this one go. So the timing was exactly perfect on this one. So one of the reasons this car was purchased and utilized versus the Michale's other 64 GTO was just I felt the simple fact the other car was a running and driving and complete original 64 convertible. I figured they could sell that, use the money towards this instead of cutting up their already original car, which made no sense to me. So this one was ultimately utilized just because it was a better bang for the buck per se. The main goal here with this vehicle and what the Michales are trying to ultimately achieve with it is they want to drive this car from basically California and New York. I guess they have some sort of family get-together they're going to be doing here in the next year or so. So we want to give them a package that would easily do that with the mileage they wanted and drivability. So that's why we chose an aftermarket chassis and going through and rebuilding basically this entire body so we knew what we were starting with and to give them, like I've said, a reliable package. So we got this car about 2 years ago, and one of the first things we did, we started assessing the vehicle, looking at what it needed, and made a major phone call over to the guys over at Dynacorn, purchased a hood, paint floor, trunk floor, quarter panels, inner fenders, outer wheelhouses, etc. A lot of panels there in themselves. We started to blow the car apart though prior to that, and we knew we had a lot of rust in the floor pans and so on. The frame, it had seen better days. It was actually starting to delaminate. The frame was in terrible shape. The motor that was in it was just a straight 6 with a power glide behind it, so it wasn't worth saving. But we sort of got a game plan together, and that's where we took it from there and ordered some other components once the Michales ultimately purchased the car. So ultimately, when we got through with our portion of the vehicle, we wanted to get Untouchable Metalworks involved on this project because we're having some panel fitment issues. Also, we're noticing some crash damage in this car. Obviously, being 60 years old, you're going to see things like that. So we called Jose, told him what was going on. He said, sure, send it down. So phase one with this car was basically calling up Jose, going over some of the details on why the basically quarter to door wouldn't fit and fender to door wouldn't fit. We wanted to measure the car out, figure out what was going on. We know this car had some prior crash damage over the years, so that was one of the first things to address. And come to find out, the quarter panels were actually too far forward on the vehicle, which was causing some of the issues. And that was one of the things that was first addressed on the car, was to cut the quarter panels off and then move them backward. So one of the issues you can see right here, this is ultimately the quarter panel had to come back this much, or you can see the scribe lines that were made by Jose and his crew. The quarter panel ended up coming back roughly 5/16 of an inch. Aftermarket quarters are good, but there's a couple issues with them, and also the car itself we think has some crash damage that had to be straightened up as well. So it's a mix of the two. So previously, one of the things we also first did when we got the car back was to basically cut the tunnel out and replace that with a Roadster shop tunnel to fit their chassis. This is a rather tall tunnel. It allows for 4L60, 4L80, whatever you want, or even T56. We did that. Down here in the floor pan is actually a box for the ECU, or fuse panel, I should say. And actually the ECU goes over here on the driver's side kick panel. So those were some of the things that we had to do almost immediately on the car to fit all the wiring and packaging of this either chassis or engine and wiring harness combo. And once that stuff was done, then the body actually dropped down the chassis and fit properly. So once the crash damage was sort of figured out and the alignment of the quarters was figured out, then it was one of the biggest issues on all these A-body cars, whether it's Chevelle or Goat, was making sure all these panels were aligned. And one of the biggest key factors on these cars, you can tell if it's right or not, is if this is a cross. Obviously this thing still needs a little more alignment, but this is supposed to be a perfect T. And a lot of these things look like a parallelogram sometimes. So that was set up, holes were repaired, holes were, after they were repaired, were then sanded and planished. There was a boatload of holes here. Usually on these cars, they have, on the Le Mans especially, they have little gills that go here. All those were filled. and then planished smooth. The fenders themselves were then heat and shrunk in certain areas, and then also the edge was tuned up to fit this, have the same curvature as the door, so you have a consistent door gap. So that was one of the major issues there. This door was a new one that was put on, courtesy of us. We had another door, thank God. The other one was rotted out in the corners. That was one of the things that they did. So they ended up taking this and patching a couple things on it, but this was not nearly as bad what was on the car originally. So definitely helped out. So in here in the engine bay, one of the things that was also damaged in this car from previous crash damage was this radiator support. This was actually had a major curve to it because it had been punched in. So this whole top was actually remade. The end caps were used off the original Pontiac radiator support, but this is a completely new piece that was made. It also hides all the factory dimples and holes and ugliness, we'll call it, that's usually there, but it also helped fix the crash damage that was in this radiator support. One of the other things that was done in this radiator support is at the bottom, you can't see it, but it was actually split in half, and 3/8 of an inch of a sliver was added to it to widen it because it was actually too narrow, which was closing up on the radiator itself. So there was some issues there. Some of the other issues were the front bumper that came on this car had taken a pretty good impact. It looked like the bumper had been basically pulled up on the sides. It was smiling at you, per se. It was sort of funny. But this is another bumper we found here down in Southern California and ended up putting on the vehicle. So in the engine bay on this 64 GTO, one of the first things we started off with was modifying the radiator support. We want to do the typical Coybilt engine bay. So what that usually entails is cleaning up the top half of this cap on a rad support, adding sides so you can mount on this side a overflow bottle, which will go here. And then on this side, the same thing will be a power steering bottle, which looks symmetrical. Symmetry is beauty. So that's one of the things we did there. Got that all done and got these mounts all figured out for the radiator itself. Got it bolted in. Looks great. We're really happy with it. The next step after that was to then start running all the AC lines and heater lines. So what we typically do is try to get them in a bundle of 4 and then run them back to the cowl and pop a hole, which then has a through firewall bulkhead connector, which is underneath this passenger side fender. You can just barely see it. So I ended up getting all that. Made a custom bracket that sits underneath here that houses your number 6 line, then number 8. Number 6 being the receiver dryer, which is mounted underneath here. Then your number 8 line, which then runs up to your, not receiver dryer, but condenser in this case. Just wanted to have a really clean and simple engine bay. So those were some of the things that were done. This air intake tube was fabricated and made up, came out real nice. One of the things I'm going to jump back to was also the transmission cooler lines and all that were made. You'd have to go to the other side to see them. They basically terminate at the bottom side and then come out on the passenger side and go to the transmission cooler lines we made from the trans to the radiator itself. So real clean setup, really happy with that. So this is actually a 495 horse. I said earlier 525. This is a 495 horse LS3 crate. It's been dressed up with the Holley valve covers to hide the coil packs. Otherwise, it's basically completely stock. It's got a vintage air front drive setup on it. But like I said, otherwise it is basically just a 495 horse LS3. They wanted something very drivable with good street manners, and we figured this would fit the bill nicely. So one of the things I know we're going to get a little bit beat up on, just want to give everyone a FYI. These double nuts is not actually how it's going to go. We just put these on here for transport. These nuts honestly go up here. These were just for easy adjustment earlier. Same with this stuff, it's just to mock it up. So no need to fear. So the master cylinder combo, these reservoirs will come off. There's billet ones going on, but this is a tandem master from the guys over at Willwood. This is their proportioning valve. And here's some brake lines we built. One needs to be shortened to clean this up, but overall that's the look we're going for. You got your proportioning valve there, just a really clean, simple little setup. And we're really happy with the way it came out. One of the other things that we like to do over at Coybilt that is sort of a signature thing is we like smooth firewalls and we like hiding all the wiring. So usually we'll put a whole firewall in, then we'll pop a major hole either in the middle of the tunnel or the bottom or the the transition area of the tunnel, or bottom of the firewall, whatever you want to call it, then run the wiring up and through around the motor. So that's one of the things we did there. Also on the other side, if you look on the back of the cylinder head on the engine itself, we like to run the dipstick tubes as hidden as possible for the transmission if it's automatic. So that's back there with a little bracket that mounts off the cylinder head. Also the battery leads that go from the battery to the actual starter, and also a lead that goes to ground the engine to the battery, run up through the floor and then terminate through the firewall, and are basically hidden on the passenger side. If it was a Pontiac, it'd be on the driver's side, but being a LS-based motor, they're always on the passenger side. So there's a plethora of things happening in this trunk, but I want to show you guys some of the things that are going on. As you can see, this is a new trunk floor. It's been narrowed a little bit for these ABC wheel tubs. And then the main thing is, because when you run a Roadster shop chassis, you do have to have reliefs for their frame rails. Made this panel right here. So that ties into the original floor pan. It is stepped with a flange, but it comes out real clean, real nice, and also allows for these spot welds underneath, or actually for the gas tank braces. So really clean install. Really like what Jose and his guys came up with on that. Really clean things up. But next step is to seam seal this trunk floor and obviously paint it at some point. So very happy with the outcome. Now that Jose and his team are done with their portion of the build, we're going to take it back up to Northern California, take a look over the car. The biggest thing we think we've got to go through, make sure the shift linkage works on the transmission itself, make sure that's all figured out, double check any mechanical features that may be tied into the body, i.e. if they need any modification to sheet metal, we'll address that. Fit moldings throughout, do some final tune-up just to double check every last little detail. If all that checks out, blow it apart and send it down to paint.